Hey guys, I wanted to finish the week off with a quick thing of notes. Please make sure you actually listen to the notes in this video and don't just copy them down. And yeah, so the Chinese, we're going to talk about them a little bit today and a little bit about the Mongols. The Chinese, as we learned, they were great inventors. One thing that they found was how to burn coal for heat. Coal is an element that you dig out of the ground, and it burns hotter and better than wood and longer. And so it gets so hot that they were able to then create something called steel, which basically is stronger than iron, stronger than bronze. It was stronger than what other countries were using out there for their armor and their weapons and that. And so they built these huge coal furnaces. The coal then would get this metal element so hot that it would turn liquid. They could pour the liquid into a mold, and then when it cooled, it would be in the shape of whatever armor or sword or so forth that they needed. It's just still same the premise that we use today. We learned from the Chinese. Another thing they invent is the idea of a printing press. So in 600 AD, which was about 1400 years ago, they invent this first idea. Now it wasn't really fast, so whatever they were going to print, someone had to on a piece of wood, carve out each and every word that was to be printed, and then they put ink on top of that, and then push it down on the paper. So it took a long time because you had to make all that, you'd do all that carving out. But once they had the block, then they could print pages pretty well. And then in 1000 AD, Pi Xing invents what's called movable type. So each character is a separate piece of wood. So they don't have letters in Chinese, so it would have been each word had its own symbol, and they would have these thousands and thousands of these symbols cut out, and then they could just place them down in whatever order they need to, and put ink on it, and then print it, like push it down on the paper. Another huge invention, of course, is gunpowder that was found by mistake as they were trying to actually find some sort of medical use for what gunpowder was, and it turns out by mistake they found out it was explosive. It was used for fireworks, and then they invent what's called the fire lance, which was really the first kind of idea for a gun. It didn't shoot a bullet out; it just shot like fireworks out of it. But that was the first idea, which eventually will turn into the idea for a gun. And here's a picture of the original printing press, if you were, and notice that these are big blocks with different symbols on it. So you imagine someone had to carve all this out, okay, and but then you would put ink on top of that, and then push that down on the paper, and it would show up on the paper. And then they got better, and Pi Xing invents these movable blocks, movable print, if you will, so that each one of these blocks then could be moved in whatever order you needed. Lock them into that big box that you see here, and then put ink on it and print it. And so it was a lot easier. And then eventually they'll get even better using what looks like cast iron blocks with all the Chinese symbols here. And so then they just move all these letters however they want. Or not letters, but words, and they're good to go. All right. Now let's move into the Mongols. We've just learned about them, so this should be a little bit of review. They came from Mongolia, which was north of China. They lived in what's called the steppes, these kind of grassy hilllands north of China. There were lots and lots of wild horses there, which there still are today. And so they grew up being really good at horseback, which made them great warriors. In fact, when they were around age 3, the young boys learned how to ride a horse. They were pretty nomadic, didn't really have their own cities. They were always just going and capturing other people, or stealing their food and resources, until Genghis Khan came around, and he actually will unite the Mongols and create this huge empire. His real name was Temujin, and once he starts to gather and unite the Mongols, they vote him or elect him to be Genghis Khan, which meant the great or strong ruler, and that's exactly what he was. He eventually will have 100,000 or more skilled soldiers, all skilled at horseback, and they robbed and burned cities. They were they would just create terror and would scare their enemies so much so that sometimes they didn't even have to fight, that their enemies would just give up. They invaded China. They took control of of all of northern China and almost all of China by 1215. Also, places like Eastern Europe and then Middle East, like Palestine, Syria, and Egypt. And so they had actually create what is known as the largest continuous empire in the world that we've ever known. And it only took them 25 years to do it. Uh, After he dies, his grandson will take over. He becomes known as Kublai Khan. He's just as good a warrior and pretty vicious as was Genghis Khan, but he will move to make the capital city, and he'll name it Khanbalik after himself, which is actually where Beijing is located today. And he will create what becomes known as the Yuan dynasty. It's the new dynasty led by Kublai Khan. It lasts for about 100 years, and eventually the Mongols will get taken over, and the Chinese will actually retake their land back. But he does try to combine the Chinese and the Mongol cultures. He keeps some of the Chinese officials in government jobs. The Mongols were mostly Buddhist, but he allowed other religions like Christian, Muslims, and Hindus all to, people to keep their religion, and that was pretty good. But the Mongols were just too different than the Chinese, and eventually the Chinese are going to fight back and take their land back. Also during this time, there was an Italian explorer named Marco Polo, who no European was ever allowed in China until the Mongols got there. The Chinese just didn't want anyone coming in and seeing what they had done or to steal any of their ideas. Marco Polo was allowed to spend about 16 years traveling and recording what he saw. By the way, if you've ever played that game, Marco Polo, in the pool, that's kind of connected to that being an explorer, if you will, and traveling and that. Marco Polo will write this great book also that about his discoveries, and that book will be read by a young teenager named Christopher Columbus, who will be inspired by that book to explore other places in the world. So anyway, the Chinese eventually will regain control. They drive out the Mongols in 1386 because they've just had enough, and they will create what's called the Ming Dynasty, one of the last great Chinese dynasties. So they bring back China to what it was and kick the Mongols out. Ming means brilliant, and it was led by Yongle, and he will move the capital to Beijing, the capital of China now, not the capital of Mongolia, and that's where the capital is today. He'll also build this huge imperial city, this large area of palaces and government buildings. There's over 1,000 rooms in this building, and it's pretty amazing. And then inside the center of the imperial city, right, which is there for the king or the emperor, is the Forbidden City. And only the emperor and his family and some of the top officials are allowed to enter. And if anyone else enters without permission, they're put to death. And today, very few people have ever actually been inside the imperial city. During the Ming Dynasty, they'll also rebuild the Great Wall. And it's really the wall that people see today and that visit. It's the wall that was built during this dynasty, big and thick and quite enormous. It's quite an amazing thing. Here's a picture of the imperial city. It's huge, 30-foot walls protecting it. You are allowed to go into the parts of it. You just aren't allowed into the very center, where is known as the Forbidden City. And then, here, of course, here's a picture of the Great Wall of China, this is the newer version of it, made 600 years or so ago from the Ming Dynasty. So that's how we're going to talk a little bit about today with Mongolia and then the Ming Dynasty reconquering and taking China back. So I hope you learned lots. Please put your notes in your binder or your folder. We will be having a quiz next week using your notes to study for. So hope you learned lots, and hope you have a great weekend. See you guys.